Tonight on the programme, Scotland's Cabinet warns the Prime Minister to step back in the row over plans for an independence referendum. But Theresa May says Scots don't even want one. We'll be assessing the possibilities for Scotland's future place in Europe. We'll hear from our correspondents at the Scottish, UK and European Parliaments. Also on the programme, travel disruption as another lorry is blown over as it crosses the Forth Road Bridge, despite high wind warnings. In golf, members at Muirfield vote to reverse its single-sex policy and admit women. Bullied for being gay to becoming a successful singer-songwriter, Horse MacDonald brings her story to the stage.
They do say that sticks and stones may break your bones, but names will never hurt you. It's not true.
Hello there, good evening. Scotland's Cabinet has warned the Prime Minister to step back in the row over plans for an independence referendum. But Theresa May told the Commons she was acting in the interests of the entire UK, including Scotland. She insisted a referendum was not wanted by the Scottish people. Holyrood will vote next week on whether to go ahead with the demand for a referendum. This from our political editor, Brian Taylor.
You can hear it.
Among friends. The First Minister wins backing from her Cabinet for insisting that detailed plans for an independence referendum, including on timing, should be solely in Holyrood's hands.
I think the Prime Minister should step back. But also there is the issue, if the Scottish Parliament next week votes for this, then there shouldn't be any question about either it happening or when it happens.
Statement, the Prime Minister.
Naturally, the Prime Minister takes a different view.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Goodness, there's a lot of hubbub from the government benches on this. Perhaps.
The SNP's deputy leader urged her, even at this late stage, to agree a distinctive Brexit deal for Scotland. Theresa May said what worked for the UK worked for Scotland.
Jobs, growth and competitiveness, those are issues that matter to the Scottish people, but also matter to the people of the whole of the United Kingdom. I would simply remind him and his colleagues once again that the most important single market for Scotland is the single market of the United Kingdom.
But she again sidestepped questions as to whether she would veto a second independence referendum. There's speculation she may seek to delay any ballot until at least Brexit is settled, presumably in 2019. Last time around, prior to 2014, David Cameron and Alex Salmond signed the Edinburgh Agreement, setting out terms for the referendum then. In practice,
Thank you, David. Thank you very much.
Negotiations and a deal would be required this time too.
Having this come yesterday, and then of course it was so busy in here last night.
But the campaigns are already forming. Suzanne McLaughlin runs the Yes Bar in Glasgow. She's ready, but canny too.
There is certainly a group of people who do not want to be in Europe that were yes voters last time. So it does change the debate slightly. But from my perspective, I think, I don't believe in Scottish exceptionalism in any way, shape or form, but I do believe that the people who live in a country get to make the decisions about the country.
Scotland in Union, because we don't really want another referendum.
This group say they'll back the Union free from party allegiance.
Fired up isn't the way I would describe it. I'm resolved to the fact that the government seem to be pushing in that direction. It's disappointing. I think there are things we should be doing over the next 18 months, but Scotland and Union will ensure that the voices of a silent majority are heard.
Not yet a storm then, but blustery, breezy. Looks like Scotland will be asked to choose once more. When is less certain. Brian Taylor, reporting Scotland.
So if and when there is another vote, the First Minister has said independence is the only way to secure Scotland's place in Europe and the European single market. But does that mean the Scottish Government will push for full EU membership? Our political correspondent Glenn Campbell's been looking into that.
In any language, in 2014, the Yes campaign wanted Scotland to stay in the EU and become a full independent member. But the most senior EU official at the time said that could not be done.
In case there is a new country, a new state, coming out of our current member state, it will have to apply.
This is the Barroso Doctrine. It has been reaffirmed.
In the Commons today, the Prime Minister repeated the so-called Barroso Doctrine, arguing that a vote for independence would put Scotland outside the EU.
Escocia acabará siendo independiente.
And the Spanish Foreign Minister spoke in similar terms at a news conference in Peru. None of that seems to bother SNP ministers here at Holyrood. Full EU membership, they say, is still their policy. But take a look at their timetable for another independence referendum, either just before or very soon after negotiations to take the UK out of the European Union are complete. Well, that seems to acknowledge that a more flexible approach to European relations might just be required.
If Scotland votes for independence, but that's just before the UK leaves the EU, it won't actually be an independent state. So it would have to apply, it would have to go through talks, but I think that would be very, very fast because obviously Scotland already meets most of the EU criteria, and we saw that 20 years ago or more when Austria and Finland joined. They were in the European Free Trade Area. They did then talks in just over a year.
Being like Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein in the European Free Trade Association and through that the European Economic Area was a status the Scottish Government said it could live with as a Brexit compromise. That could be an independence option too.
Of course, I know there is still much to do.
There's another reason SNP leaders might not want to place too much emphasis on full EU membership.
There is clearly a substantial body of people who voted yes in 2014 but who voted to leave the European Union. Around 1 in 3 indeed yes voters seem to have gone down that path, and it's already pretty clear from the polling evidence that these voters have been less loyal and are less loyal to the yes cause than those who voted to remain.
Lots to think about for those seeking to reposition Scotland as an independent European country. Glenn Campbell, reporting Scotland.
Well, I'm joined now by our correspondents at 3 parliaments. Glenn Campbell is at the Scottish Parliament, Nick Eardley is in Westminster, and Dan Johnson is in Strasbourg, where the European Parliament is meeting. Starting with Dan, now you've been talking to politicians in Strasbourg today. Is there any sense of a softening of attitudes towards Scotland's position?
Yes, I think there is. There's been a lot of sympathy expressed here for the Scottish position today, although everyone's saying this is a matter for the Scots and they don't want to be seen to be interfering in Scottish affairs. But one party leader here this morning told me that Scotland would be welcomed with open arms if it wanted to remain in the EU. Not everyone echoes that, particularly the Spanish politicians have said that Scotland would have to go to the back of the queue, would have to fill in the forms, would have to go through the proper process. That's because they fear that Scottish independence would risk fueling the Catalonian campaign for independence in their own country. That would be a risk to them. And there's also an issue about fulfilling that process that everyone seems to agree on. So the option of Scotland, if it did vote for independence in a second referendum, actually staying in the EU seems to have been ruled out. It's going to be more a case of leaving with Britain and then seeking to rejoin later. But that's certainly something that the majority of politicians here appear to have welcomed.
OK, Dan, thanks. Well, Nick Eardley is in Westminster for us. Nick, we've heard some suggestions of conditions that the Prime Minister might put on the timing of a second independence referendum, but nothing concrete from Downing Street yet.
No, Katrina, that's right. We heard the Prime Minister say today that this is a time for unity, but little in terms of specifics about how she plans to ensure that after what Nicola Sturgeon said yesterday. I think there's a sense with some in the UK government that they don't want to be rushed into an answer on this. They think Nicola Sturgeon chose her timing yesterday. They want to choose their timing when it comes to responding. Theresa May and her ministers have a lot to weigh up, particularly on that issue of timing. Do they think that they could properly fight a referendum campaign at the same time as overseeing either Brexit negotiations or the Brexit process? Might they try, as many have speculated, to delay it perhaps until later in 2019, perhaps even after that? There's much speculation here that that will be the main bone of contention with the Scottish Government. I think that's fair to say. And it should be remembered that Theresa May has a lot on her plate at the moment. She's about to fire the starting gun on one of the most complex negotiations in modern British history. So some think that agreeing the terms of any future referendum with the Scottish Government could be a fairly lengthy process. We know that independence tonight is very much back on the agenda. The specific form and format that a future vote could take, though, might take a bit longer.
Thanks for that, Nick. And Glenn Campbell's at a rather lively-looking Holyrood for us this evening. Glenn, what have we learned today?
Well, there's a reception for Polish Scots here at Holyrood tonight. I think what we have not learned, as Nick has been indicating, is whether or not the UK government is going to be willing to grant Holyrood the power to have another independence referendum, and if it is, whether or not it will allow that to take place while Brexit negotiations are underway, or seek to delay it until after, in effect, the UK is out of the European Union. What we have learned is a little more about how Nicola Sturgeon will go about getting the backing of this place, getting the backing of MSPs to request the power for another referendum. There's going to be a 2-day debate next week on Tuesday and Wednesday before MSPs are asked to vote, and we got a foretaste of that debate with the question here at Holyrood a little earlier, where clearly Labour, the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats will oppose the idea of seeking the power for another referendum, but the Greens have indicated that they will vote with the SNP and give Nicola Sturgeon the majority she needs to put in that request. And if not before, at that point, the ball will be in the UK government's court. It will be for them to respond to Nicola Sturgeon's request.
OK, Glenn, thanks. Enjoy the reception. Well, next Tuesday, Reporting Scotland's hosting a debate looking ahead to the impact of Brexit and the independence referendum. If you'd like to be part of the audience and put your questions to our panel, you'll find details of how to apply on the BBC Scotland News website on the Reporting Scotland page. And the Forth Road Bridge was closed in both directions today after a lorry was blown onto the central reservation. The bridge was closed to high-sided vehicles at the time due to the high winds. In January, the bridge was closed for almost a day after a similar incident. Morag Kinnebra is at the bridge for us tonight. Morag, I understand it's just reopened in the past few minutes.
Within the last half hour, the Forth Road Bridge has reopened in both directions to vehicles, including high-sided vehicles, because the winds have dropped a little bit. But it was a very different story earlier on today when they had to put concrete blocks on the lorry that had blown over to make sure it didn't blow over again as they escorted it north over here to Fife. Engineers then went on and checked the central barrier to make sure it wasn't damaged. When they were happy it was safe to reopen the bridge, they did so, but it was closed for about 4 hours this afternoon, including much of the evening rush hour.
That, Morag. So how bad was the disruption?
Well, there was considerable disruption with tailbacks both north and south of the bridge, drivers having to divert via the Kincardine Bridge. We ourselves came over by train where it was standing room only in the carriageways, and people very concerned, very upset and frustrated that this is the second time this winter that this has happened.
Yeah, so how does this compare to January's event?
Very similar indeed, almost exactly the same part of the bridge just beside the North Tower heading over to Fife where the lorry blew over its container this time onto the barrier. Luckily in both cases nobody has been hurt, and there's speculation this evening because today this vehicle had a left side drive with foreign plates. Perhaps the driver didn't realise that the warning signs not to cross with high winds if you're a high-sided vehicle are mandatory. The lorry driver, the 54-year-old driver of the lorry of the incident in January, has been charged with dangerous driving and is due to appear in court tomorrow. And this afternoon the Transport Minister issuing a warning to drivers. They must take heed of these warnings. They are mandatory, and he said the police will be investigating.
Morag Kinnebra, many thanks. Now you're watching BBC Reporting Scotland. It's just after 20 to 7. A reminder of tonight's top story. Scotland's Cabinet warns the Prime Minister to step back in the row over plans for an independence referendum. But Theresa May says Scots don't even want one. And still to come, the stealth of the runway repairers, how the tarmac at Glasgow Airport has been getting resurfaced while we sleep. Golf's oldest club has voted to abolish its men-only policy and admit female members. The decision at Muirfield, which reverses the result of last year's vote on the issue, has seen the East Lothian Lynx restored to the list of venues for the Open Championship, as Stephen Godden reports.
The wind of change blowing through a bastion of golfing tradition. Founded in 1744, Its single-sex policy is as old as the club itself. Last year, a vote to allow women to become members failed to deliver the necessary two-thirds majority. Asked again, however, members reached a different conclusion.
The number of votes for the resolution is 498, or 80.2%. So the rules of the club will be changed accordingly with immediate effect.
For the club's hierarchy, who'd recommended change, relief following intense criticism.
There is no doubt that some members were taken aback at the criticism we got in the press and so on, and so we felt it was appropriate to give members a second chance.
At the heart of developments, the relationship between Muirfield and the Open Championship. Within hours of last year's no vote, the course was removed from the list of venues for golf's oldest major.
Oh, I think that came as a real shock when it happened so suddenly. You know, I think the dissenters hadn't expected that to happen. They thought they could go on as they were. And you can understand, you know, why they might have thought that, but not a bit of it.
Reinstatement to the Open Rota was an instant benefit of today's announcement.
And there's economic pressure. The amount of money they were going to lose by not being on the open list is amazing. And I think there'd be pressure from other areas. But no matter what the reason was for the change of heart, I think the decision is very welcome.
A view shared by Swiss tourists playing Muirfield today as visitors.
It's a wonderful decision, but it's for me it has as well something a little bit sad.
I find it's a very historical moment. I find it great that women can become members.
The club say they're determined that all members are treated equally. The same lengthy joining process will apply, which means that it will be at least a couple of years before the first women take to the fairways here as members. Stephen Godden, reporting Scotland, Muirfield.
A new search to find the body of missing Coatbridge schoolgirl Moira Anderson has begun in a canal near the town. In February 1957, she left her grandmother's house to go to a shop but never returned. Working with specialist forensic teams and scientists, the police will use ground-penetrating radar and sonar on a stretch of the Monkland Canal. Suzanne Allen can tell us more.
60 years after the search for Moira Anderson started, a new investigation begins. There is a lot of hope here. Hope that she may be found. Hope that her family will get answers. But why here and now?
Where we're standing just now is roughly about 900 metres from the last sighting of Moira on the 23rd of February 1957. It's also very near the bus route and the turning circle that Alexander Gartshaw would have driven on at that particular time. And more importantly, the morning after that, the 24th of February 1957, we have two witnesses who have identified a man carrying a large sack down towards the canal as if he was looking to deposit something within it.
Moira left her grandmother's house in Coatbridge one Saturday afternoon in February. She got on a bus. The driver was Alexander Gartshaw, a man who the police have said they would have charged with her murder had he been alive today. The search will focus on a 170-metre stretch of the canal. There's a chance she may be embedded in 2 metres of silt. Scientists will be using magnetometry. If she was put in the water with her shoes on, magnets will pick up the metal from the buckles.
If we're going from what the two witnesses have identified, a male with a sack, this heavy sack, and she has potentially been weighed down into the silt layer, there is a potential that there will be the potential to recover skeletal remains.
But we've been here before. 4 years ago, a grave in Old Monkland Cemetery was exhumed. It came to nothing. Today is the beginning of an investigation that will last 2 weeks. Police, forensics and scientists will begin by scanning the canal and the canal bank using ground-penetrating radar and sonar. If Moira Anderson's remains are found, it will put an end to a 60-year-old mystery. Suzanne Allen, reporting Scotland, Monkland Canal.
Patients from Shetland who have to travel to Aberdeen for hospital appointments and treatments are to be sent by ferry rather than plane. NHS Shetland has decided to use the boat as the first choice of travel in an effort to save £1 million. It'll mean a journey of 12 hours instead of a 1-hour flight. NHS Shetland says air travel will still be available for those who have a genuine need, like pregnant women, children and patients requiring cancer treatments. The final bill for repairs to the clock tower at Aberdeen's Townhouse could end up at more than £4.3 million. It was originally estimated at just £1.2 million. The A-listed structure had fallen into disrepair, raising health and safety concerns. Work has now been completed. Now, she's one of Scotland's best-known singers with a worldwide following and a string of hit albums. But Horse MacDonald's latest stage show is her most personal to date. It tells the story of her journey from a teenager bullied for being gay to an outspoken campaigner for equal rights. Our arts correspondent Pauline McLean reports.
They do say that sticks and stones may break your bones, but names will never hurt you. It's not true.
Growing up in Lanark in the 60s and 70s wasn't easy for a girl called Sheena, who changed her name to Horse. Bullied and abused from an early age was a difficult story to tell.
I was beginning to remember things that I hadn't remembered, because some things happened when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and I was getting some sort of flashbacks, and so it was a very, very difficult and dark time to work through some of those things. Careful with me, careful with my heart.
Music was an escape, but it also helped Horse find her own voice, something she feels has struck a chord with audiences at her latest show, first at the Edinburgh Fringe and now on a tour of Scotland. And the women who helped her create the show believe it has never been more timely.
This is a world in which all human beings are equal, and we all have the right to love who we want to love, to live the lives we want to live. You know, we can never sit back on that. And I think also today's younger generation need to know that the things they're experiencing, we experienced, and we helped move things forward, and they can do that too.
Horse's own life mirrors the wider changes which have happened over the past few decades, from the Equal Marriage Bill, which allowed her to marry her partner Alana Jane, to being named one of the Saltire Society's Outstanding Women of Scotland.
You can't possibly do somebody's life story in an hour, but the things that we've chosen really do highlight how awful it was. But the thing that comes out of it is, it got better. It got better for me. And the changes have meant a huge amount to not just Scotland, but the whole world.
The shows, which include music, discussion and performance, begin in Glasgow this week. Pauline McLean, reporting Scotland.
A major civil engineering project has been taking place while most of us are asleep. The runway at Glasgow Airport has been resurfaced using the latest technology, but there's been minimal disruption because they've been doing it in the middle of the night. Here's our science correspondent, Kenneth MacDonald.
It's 11 p.m, time to put out the lights.
If you've ever flown in or out of Glasgow Airport, then you've been here before. It's the middle of the runway, but then the runway didn't look like this. That's because they're resurfacing the entire thing, piece by piece, in the middle of the night.
Well, we have to notify the airlines far in advance as doing the works. We effectively take the runway at 11 o'clock at night and we give it back at 5 o'clock in the morning, so we're ready for operations at about 5:30, 5:45.
It runs smoothly because it's been more than 3 years in the planning. They've been working in the night and in winter 120 metres at a time to keep disruption to a minimum. By midnight, the old surface is gone, ready for the new high-tech one. But all of this depends on the meteorologists.
As a weather protocol, we're checking the weather at 12 o'clock, we're checking the weather at 4 o'clock, 6:30, 9:30, and then we go. And we don't go either until we've got the material batched and ready to come.
And this is where the science really comes in. It may look like standard issue black stuff, but it's packed with polymers, long chain molecules like you find in plastics, and that will make the surface tougher than ever before on a runway where planes are getting heavier and there are nearly 100,000 takeoffs and landings a year.
We've tried to develop an asphalt that's capable of modern day fatigues and runway loadings, looking forward to the future. So Glasgow Airport will have a polymer modified asphalt, which will be the first runway in Scotland to adopt that material, and one of possibly 2 or 3 throughout the whole of the UK at the moment.
And they're not done yet. They've also replaced more than 200 lights, and grooves have to be cut in the new surface to let the rain drain away and the planes catch a grip.
Perhaps the most remarkable thing about this huge operation is that by 5 o'clock this morning, all of this will be gone. By 6 o'clock, the runway will have been handed back and the first flight will have taken off for Amsterdam. And it's a fair bet that none of the 180 people on board will have any idea that this has happened. Kenneth MacDonald, reporting Scotland, Glasgow Airport.
Well, it's time for the forecast now. Chris is here. It's been a windy one today for some, so to speak, Chris.
Certainly has, Katrina. Thank you very much indeed. Hello there, good evening to you. Windy and showery, in fact. Here's the earlier satellite and radar pictures. Some of those showers quite heavy, some thunder in the mix. And look at them whipping along there, all thanks to those high winds. And how strong have those winds been? Well, 77 miles an hour in Shetland, but even through parts of the central belt, 50 to 60 miles an hour. Incidentally, the highest wind gusts on the Forth Road Bridge, 57 miles an hour this afternoon. Out with the showers, some sunshine, beautiful blue skies, captured by one of our weather watchers, Mimi, a little earlier. And tonight, largely dry for most of the mainland. Still some showers across the far north and the Northern Isles. Still windy here. Not quite the gale force gusts we've had, but still strong coming in from the west. Elsewhere, the wind's tending to ease down. And temperatures there in towns and cities around 4 to 7 Celsius, perhaps a touch cooler in a few sheltered eastern glens. So to start the day tomorrow, it's still windy across the far north, strong times, some early sunshine for the north, the east and the south, but in the west, the cloud building, that's a warm front edging its way in, so the cloud will spread right across the country through the course of the day, followed by some outbreaks of rain. So by mid-afternoon, a fairly cloudy picture across the country, some outbreaks of rain through parts of Ayrshire in towards Glasgow, Kintyre, Argyll generally and up towards the northwest, and some of that wet weather just edging its way eastwards. But really through parts of Angus, Aberdeenshire, probably staying dry. Some patchy rain in towards Murray and up towards Sutherland. Caithness, probably some sunshine for you actually, and not too bad for the Northern Isles, far less windier compared with today. Into the evening, that wet, sort of drizzly weather edging its way northwards, some mist and murk around the coast and across the hills. We're in warm sector conditions as we head through towards Thursday, but the trailing cold front hot on its heels. So Thursday gets off to a cloudy, wet start, bit of mist and murk around, and then the wet weather turns a little heavier by the afternoon. That's the cold front edging its way in, and as its name suggests, it's at the front of the cold air, so the temperature's falling away through the course of the day, turning some of those showers to snow on the hills. That's the forecast. For now.
Thanks for that, Christopher. And now a reminder of tonight's main news. Tens of thousands of children are at risk of starving to death in parts of Africa and the Middle East as millions of people face famine. The UN says the crisis in South Sudan, Yemen, Somalia and Nigeria could be the worst in 60 years. And Scotland's cabinet has warned the Prime Minister to step back in the row over plans for an independence referendum. Theresa May told the Commons she was acting in the interests of the entire UK, insisting a referendum was not wanted by the Scottish people. And that's Reporting Scotland. Rona McLeod will have the headlines at 8 and the late bulletin after the 10 o'clock news. But from all of us here, have a good evening. Bye-bye.